I'm very happy that this is primarily a discussion where the students are there and we are all on the other side of the table. So it gives us special pleasure to be addressing the young scholars, the future scholars, not just of federalism, but of Indian politics, society, international relations, globalization and the like. So I'm very happy with that scope. My theme is Deepening Democracy and Decentralized Governance. I deliberately decided to reflect in the first part on the issue of deepening democracy. Recently, a Belgian author wrote an article in the Guardian of London, and whose title was rather that will cause you some concern. The title of the article was "Why Elections Are Bad for Democracy." Now, he said that all democracies have taken a dangerous role. They have primarily become electorally fundamentalist, which means they have reduced democracy to elections. And that is important to bear in mind. This is the question being raised as much in so-called advanced democracies of the West, as well as the aspiring democracy, countries which aspire to be democracy. It is the 21st century which has brought out this dilemma very firmly. What is so new about 21st century? First, you will all notice that though voters venerate elections, they begin to despise the people who they have elected. It happens very soon. You see what happened in Delhi, I mean, the kind of vote that Kejriwal got, and they suddenly say, what are they doing and all that? It has started happening with almost everyone. Because when citizens say, no, I'm the master, and please deliver, don't just only talk. So this is a new thing, that the voters have become very impatient, number one. Number two, on the other hand, the leaders want to vote the voters out. They say, oh, you don't matter. You have elected me, I'm the boss. But this is another trend which again citizens say, sorry, you can't accept. So that is the problem. And thirdly, and this is again globally, interest in politics is growing, but faith in politics is low. And that's important to discuss when we are here to discuss deepening of democracy. But what are some of the pitfalls of democracy, or rather representative democracy, what you may call procedural democracy? Many democracies have simply become polyarchies. Number one. Now, every point did not be discussed, you understand. Second, the business of government has become the privilege of the few. And that's why people say, oh, what democracy we are talking about? Third, democracy has failed to become, or rather become a bridge between the state and society. Next, it has become static. And finally, it has led to what could be called oligarchization of political system. Virtually kind of oligarchy. There are scholars like Max Weber, John Rawls, Habermas, Joshua Cohen, and Mark Sager, who viewed representative democracy with an element of great suspicion. Now, talking further about the deficit of representative democracy, you see the lack of accountability among the institutions, among the political players. Then another thing happened that they say, okay, so long as I have the blessings of my boss, the party high command, or whatever he or she may be, that's fine. So you are more worried about your allegiance to the leaders than to the citizens who have made this happen. So that's another thing that is happening. Then there is also a growing gap between the citizens and the state institutions, leading to what one American scholar calls diminishing democracy. So democracy is getting diminished. Now, some of the scholars talk of, in this connection, the elite monopoly of democracy. Particularly some scholars, I don't have time to mention each and every, some of the American scholars have been talking about that. Then there is something else which is happening at the citizens level. You have all seen what happened during the Arab Spring. You have seen the Anna Hazare movement. You have seen the Occupy movement in the US, where the citizens said 1% versus 99%. One scholar says that the United States is becoming a 1% society. And that's why there is resentment from the citizens. So thanks to the initiative and active participation of citizens, some of the new things have emerged that I want your attention to know. And that is this shift in democracy. And in the last several years, maybe a decade or so, there has been displacement of power upward, downward, and outward. When we are talking of upward displacement of power, I have in mind the UN agencies, the donor agencies, the IMF, those who fund your project or your government, but they have become important players. It's very important, so let's remember that. Now, displacement of power downwards would mean the local government, local community, citizens groups, organizations and all that sort. So these have become new actors. And because of that, a new pyramid of power, a new pyramid of democracy, which seems to have appeared. Now, this new pyramid of democracy has three distinct features. One, we see there is empowered citizens, but there is weakened leader in many of the countries. Right now, it looks like India has a very strong leader, but then we had several governments look like they are weaker than them. But across the world, when citizens started, leaders appear to be benefiting. That's number one feature. Number two, the public space seems to be emptying at the top. So you can say, okay, lonely at the top. You have heard the English expression. When someone goes on top of the Mount Everest, how lonely you will. So you are lonely at the top, but there's a feeling of at the bottom. In India itself, before the 73rd Constitutional Amendment, would you imagine we had only 6,000 to 7,000 people who were being elected? Parliament, both houses and assemblies. Today you have 3.4 million people who are getting elected. So you have a pyramid today, but this is the pyramid. So you have the hugely strong base. And this is how it should be. So a new pyramid of power has emerged. That's a new change that I'm thinking of attention to. The power is no more located in the state and formal institutions, thanks to all these changes. I think it's very important to take note of this. Another point is that there are people who say, look, let us democratize democracy. It is no more democratic enough. And that's the kind of demand. That, okay, we must further democratize democracy, and hence the question of deepening democracy. Making democracy relevant, making democracy accountable, meaningful to the people is, in short form, you can say, this is the process of deepening democracy. Now, democracy has been expanding beyond the nation, politics of everyday life. The question of bread and butter. People say, look, what good is your democracy? Where is my bread? And that's why these movements, including in the United States, a great land, quote unquote. So that is one. Then politics must also become politics of difference. In what way you are making a difference to the life of the man. The politics must also borrow a federationist program. And a Canadian friend will say, the moment you see during the winter that outside my window you have the guys removing snow, I know, yes, my money is being used for the right purpose. So you could see your money being used so that you don't have inconvenience. you can have a smooth ride and all that. So that's the politics of presence is very important. Amartya Sen says that deepening of democracy depends on three distinct virtues. One is the intrinsic importance. Democracy itself is of intrinsic value. The second is its instrumental contributions. And third is its constructive role in creation of values. So democracy also must become values and norms. Let me now come to decentralized governance. I think Professor Narain has given you a lot of ideas about local governance, and we will give supplement. And I liked the way he said that, look, decentralization and federalism, local governments can give a lot of power, but then they are doing as per the agenda of a certain, where you have to have democracy. So what are the rationale for decentralized governance? One is the challenges of rapid economic growth and also demand of citizenry. That you must create citizenry. It's very important to are accountable, to are educated, to are conscious. So that's why this is a need for that. Then also, democracy must be deepened so that the ordinary people can participate and influence politics. And a lot of such things, such experiments are happening, particularly in Latin America, in Africa and all that. I think all that process is going to come everywhere. With some modifications or the other. Citizens are asserting people. Capacity of the ordinary people must also be enhanced. And that can happen only when there is decentralization. You can also have active participation of citizens only when you are decentralized. Then there is another concept you may have heard about deep democracy. We can elaborate a little later. The concept of deep democracy. The term deep democracy was coined by A.B. Mindell in 1988. But they say that deep democracy must aim at bringing democracy to life in the moment of giving care. So that you feel that you are close to it. Now, unlike the classical democracy, which focuses on majority rule and all that, deep democracy is concerned about all voices, minorities, of gender, of bisexual people, of marginalized people, and that is the idea. But also all kinds of frameworks of governance will be factored in.
Ash, could you kindly repeat the reference of the deep democracy?
A.B. Mindell, A-M-Y, M-I-N-D-E-L-L.
M-I?
D-E-L-L. Very rooted. It's just anchors. It should be anchored, maybe on the ground, maybe in societal values. It also means intimacy. You should be intimate or intimately working with citizens and voters. Proximity and all that. The government should be closer to the government. This is where the local government decentralization tries. And also the importance of locality. So these are roots, anchors, intimacy, proximity, and locality. So these are some of the important traits. It also means inclusion, participation, transparency, and accountability. Now, for the first time in 2002, the UNDP Human Development Report talked of deepening democracy. And then, it had been, since then, from time to time, some of the reports, they have been emphasizing the need of deepening democracy. But much before they started talking about decentralization, Brazil started decentralization when it was still authoritarian government. So democratization happened even during the authoritarian regimes, and how the whole agenda was pushed by the Western agencies, by the UN agencies, by World Bank, by IMF, Now, Amartya Sen says that it should also be linked with the idea of justice. Now, democracy, unless so like that, I don't want to go much in on that. Let me come directly to decentralized, why it is important. Now, one scholar is called L. Pratchett, who says, look, decentralization is institutional embodiment of local government. And this is the closest one talks about how decentralization itself means local democracy and power, as well as functions and resources that national government must have, provincial government must have, rural government. Now, decentralization involves distribution of responsibility, and that's why you know whether it is transfer of power, sometimes transfer of power but not authority. You know, when we are talking of decentralization in the literal sense, but when we are talking of decentralization in the federal framework, then it means different. That's what Narain was telling us. And that's why they will need to make a distinction between deconcentration, delegation, and devolution. But deconcentration would be that, okay, this ministry is having too much of a burden, so I say, okay, why don't you handle part of my job? It can even be given to some other department. Now, that is not decentralization, real decentralization. Similarly, if you say delegate some power, you have delegated for some time, even possibly, as you were also telling, you can take it back. Devolution is the right word. It has to be devolved through a process, just like the constitutional amendment creating a Untitled Institution talks of devolution. It's a different matter that these powers and functions have not been devolved except in Kerala and some states in the case of choice. So it's not a question of voice and choice. That's why it's important. Decentralization is also conceived to be the promoter of good governance. But remember, Gandhiji said, good governance is no substitute of self-governance. You had the great good governance in India during the British period. Our forefathers said, they all always said great time. But did you know during that good governance how many millions of Indians died? At least that scale of hunger did not happen in independent India, because the moment you have some crisis, then the press will go, the civil society will go, the academia will go, and then we will some major. So self-government is important. Then decentralization is a potent instrument of deepening democracy. That's why this is linked. It is also an instrument of responsive, transparent, and accountable government. And finally, decentralization provides better access to women, ethnic, linguistic minorities into the political process. So these are some of the important trends. One of the scholars recently said about 21st century that decentralized power, not even democracy, will shape the 21st century. It's a very significant statement. So even more than democracy in the classical sense, it will depend on how much you are decentralizing. That is the level of importance which is being given to decentralization. Someone would say decentralization is the geopolitical equivalent of the second law of thermodynamics. That would mean, well, you have the inexorable universal entropy of time. And that's another way to look at it. Let me now come to some other aspects, because we have to decentralize. But then what is the model? Do we have a model? It looks like there is a very, very diverse experiences we had. It looks like that unless the decentralized governments, say local government, unless they are able to generate their own resources, that you have a problem. Because if you depend entirely on the provinces or the center, then you are not performing as a government. Then you are not, as a layer of the third tier of government. And this is the biggest challenge that we have, that our local government institutions are not in a position to raise the kind of fund. Maybe because of the structure, because when you talk of urban bodies, they manage to do, they could do even more. But the local government in the rural context, some 5,000 people live in one panchayat in some places. What is the amount that we expect them to raise in order? No one wants to. So this is another challenge. But if you see the Nordic model, where it looks like, it performs well as a democratic society, which also performs well in terms of generating enough resources, because you have quite a number of countries which are not excellent democracies or only upcoming democracy, but they are able to raise. But even that's not important. You raise resources, but you also do not compromise on your democracy. So I think democracy will remain relevant. So let me finally come to some of these problems and the challenges and then I can stop. Democratic deficits undermine democratic legitimacy. And that's why the task is to address these deficits that I have referred to many of these, how it becomes once in 5-year kind of phenomenon, how it becomes elite capture, how it becomes an instrument in the hands of those who are moneyed or those who are muscle power and all that. So the question of democratic legitimacy. The decline in the quality and substance of democracy is seen. The number of voter turnout in the which is a very nice thing, but I don't know how it will happen. The kind of technological transformations and all that. West is facing a big problem. You have 50% is great, to some countries have to compulsory voting, just to kind of model that. We are talking of participatory democracy, but then no clear model has been evolved. Say for instance, Brazil we have participatory budgeting, but it is confined to 10% of the city budget. And it happens only in cities and all that. It looks like quite a good one, but then in Venezuela it didn't work. So that is also not necessarily the model. So we are still searching for that model. But the fact is that yes, democracy must move towards participatory governance. There are no two opinions about it. So that's one point. Then at the UNDP have made a study on democracy in Latin America. They made a very interesting observation, and I think that's relevant. He says, we must move from democracy of the voters to the democracy of citizens. I think that is the crux that all that I'm trying to emphasize. But let us also see the kind of new centralization that is emerging in all of our countries. Ajay Kumar hasn't come, otherwise he was going to give an excellent paper on the dynamics of centralized and decentralized, which he has done as part of an international research involving 5 universities, and there was a presentation on that, and I was there. How you will see that despite all that talk about, I will tell you about the cooperative federalism and all that, it looks like we are quietly moving towards re-centralization. And that's not necessarily a good sign. Center has apparently taken advantage of the state's weaknesses and failures. So it is kind of, okay, you are not doing so, let us do it. You don't have this, so we will leave you. So that's one challenge. I look forward to this. Thank you very much.